Jury selection begins today for the trial of a man accused of trying to assassinate President Trump. This is the one in Florida. Trump was playing golf in Florida last year when Secret Service agents spotted what they thought was what turned out to be the barrel of an assault-style rifle in the bushes. Now the man who has pled not guilty to 5 felony counts is scheduled to go to trial. Now, some people have asked this morning, is this the case of the man who shot President Trump in the ear? That happened in Pennsylvania, and that individual was killed by agents.
So there's no trial.
So there's no trial for that one. This is a man who was just not simply, but he was hiding in the bushes, had a weapon there. A 59-year-old Ryan Routh of Hawaii, former Trump supporter, and he's told the judge, Holly, that he's going to represent himself in this trial.
And, this is Judge Eileen Cannon, and she had the maybe understatement of the month, and she said, that's a bad idea.
That's a really bad idea. ABC News chief investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky is following the case.
He has called Trump a bunch of names, all of them unflattering. He's questioned the legitimacy of having Judge Eileen Cannon preside over the trial because he said she's a Trump appointee. How is that fair? She's refused to recuse herself. All the while, lost in all of that rhetoric is the very serious nature of what he's accused of.
So a couple things. It's a jury trial, so the judge can have whatever bias he or she might have, but ultimately the concept of guilt or innocence is going to be decided by a jury. And second, as Aaron just said, this is a very serious case. I mean, I looked up the United States Code on assassination, as you might expect. It's incredibly serious, and it includes candidates for political office. And at that time, Trump was a candidate. Now, he obviously didn't assassinate Trump, but he attempted to. And under American jurisprudence, if you have a law, let's say in Utah, burglary is a second-degree felony, attempted burglary would be one step lower, a slightly less serious crime, but it's still a crime. And all you have to prove is that the individual took a substantial step toward the commission of the crime. Hiding in the bushes, carrying a weapon is probably a substantial step.
So I'm looking at a story online that says if he's convicted on attempted assassination, it's a maximum penalty of life in prison. So why would this not be the death penalty? Because he didn't actually kill him?
Yes. So in America so far, and I don't know that there's an exception to this, there's no federal crime, and there's no crime in the state of Utah for which the death penalty applies that didn't involve a death. Okay. Now, some states are saying repeat child molesters should suffer the death penalty. We'll see, but that hasn't been consistent with our Supreme Court's concept of cruel and unusual punishment. What they're saying is, unless you cause a death, you're not likely to ever receive the death penalty. So this wouldn't be a death penalty case.
Okay. So one of the things that we're seeing with the case is one of the reasons he's defending himself is because he said that his relationship with his public defenders was just irreconcilably broken.
Right. And he's made some really interesting pretrial requests, and this is more from ABC News chief investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky.
He's made a series of rather bizarre requests in pretrial motions. He asked the judge for female strippers. He asked for a putting green to be put in his jail cell. And he asked for a round of golf with President Trump. And if Trump wins, Ryan Routh says he can execute me.
Gosh.
So, you wonder, I mean, a lot of people would say he sounds like he's mentally ill. He sounds like he's crazy. My guess is he's crazy like a fox. And he's saying and doing what he needs to do because he knows that the facts are not lining up in favor of him very much and representing himself because his defense may be, I'm trying to make the world a better place, or who knows what his defense is going to be.
Yeah, who knows? One of the things he also said that if President Trump won the golf game, then Trump could execute him. That would be weird. Right. But he also said, if I win, I get his job. And I think Vice President Vance might have something to say about that.
But, I mean, it's sad that we're dealing with this, but jury selection is beginning. That's going to start today. I would assume that a trial of this nature, it doesn't sound particularly complicated, but a week, maybe 2 weeks for trial would make sense. And if it's a federal case, that means that there would be 12 jurors. It's in the Southern District of Florida. So federal crimes in America felonies carry 12 jurors, so that's a bigger burden. In Utah State, and every state has its own, our felony juries consist of 8 jurors, unless it's a death penalty case, and then you get 12.
And is that like why an even number? Because if it splits, then it's a hung jury, right? Or,
well, no. So, and in a criminal context, it has to be unanimous.
Oh, okay.
So there's no split.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter how many there are.
Oh, okay.
So in a criminal context in Utah and federally, the jury has to be unanimous. That means 12-0. And so if it's 11-1, that's what we call a hung jury. You know what I mean? You do it again. Yeah. Or if it's 1-11, it doesn't matter.
Oh, interesting.
Unanimous means unanimous. So you just need one juror to side with you. And people think that's impossible, but I've done over 200 jury trials, and I would say I've probably had 2 or 3 hung juries. I mean, they just don't happen. Jurors get together, they decide what they want to do, and they make decisions.
Interesting. So how long is the process typically to pick a jury, especially like in a federal case like this?
So Florida is a big jurisdiction. The Southern District of Florida is big. It probably won't be too difficult to find 12 people, and they'll probably have a couple of alternates, so maybe 14 who have not formed an opinion about the case, who don't know enough about the case to decide whether or not he's guilty or innocent at the start. I would assume, and I could be wrong, that jury selection could go the better part of 2 days. Today's Monday, so maybe Wednesday we'll start with opening statements, and the government, which always has the burden of proof, and so they always go first, will start putting on its witnesses. I don't know whether this defendant's going to call witnesses of his own or whether he's going to testify, but the jury selection, that's a good question, would probably in a case like this take at least a couple of days. We usually, in Utah, for cases that have got no notoriety, you can select a jury in a morning.
Oh.
And even on a felony case, it takes 3 or 4 hours and you've got a jury, and then you come back in the afternoon.
I've always had the idea that it's much more complicated than that, right? And I have never been called for jury duty. Is that so weird? I'm on the voter rolls. I'm an active voter. Never been called. Never gotten a single letter. I'll probably jinx myself now, right? But yeah, my husband has been called up several times, and they were always resolved right before he was supposed to show up at court. But my brother was called recently for what he said was a murder case, and he was dismissed. Oh, no, it wasn't recently, but he said he was called, and he walked in saying, I already know he's guilty.
That's a bad start. Yeah,
he said that he was dismissed right away.
Yeah, and you start with the venire, it's called, which is just this huge panel, and you start with 40 or 50, or in this case, maybe 100 people, and from that you whittle it down to the 12 that are ultimately going to hear the case.
I see an article here that says he has potential jurors out of a pool of 180 people. That sounds like a really big pool.
That's a big group, yeah. Right.
So you asked if he plans to bring witnesses, and this is a Politico.com article. He says he does plan to bring his son, 2 former coworkers, and his mentee to talk about his character and nonviolence, but the judge rejected his request to bring in other witnesses, including experts and authors on Palestine, and a woman with whom he had a sexual relationship to talk about how peaceful he was.
So the judge is right, and even his son and his coworker, Holly, the issue is guilt or innocence, and not character. He could be a nice guy and still commit a crime.
Right.
A character comes into play at what we call sentencing. In other words, if he's found guilty, then you can say, oh, but he was a great guy and he did, he helped people across the road.
He had a psychotic break.
This or that. But that doesn't necessarily play in terms of the guilt portion. So in American jurisprudence, there's guilt and then there's punishment. And character goes to punishment, not necessarily to guilt. So I don't know that the judge is going to allow too much of that to occur.
He also said he wants to subpoena President Trump, and the judge already said no.
Yeah, because President Trump probably doesn't have any information. I mean,
he probably doesn't know him, right?
Right, and it has no relevant information. Didn't know what was going on. He happened to be golfing at the time, and so what's that going to do? So I would assume that the judge is going to stand by that ruling, and he probably won't be allowed to call President Trump. I don't see any reason why he could. We'll be following that trial probably for the next couple of weeks and see how that shakes out, and we'll let you know when we get closer to jury verdict and if there's something interesting going on with the trial. A major immigration raid occurred in Georgia targeting workers from South Korea who were in the U.S. helping build an EV battery plant to help get Hyundai up and running. We'll be right back.